Hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to the Critique of the Week for Friday, November 13th. That is Friday the 13th. Hope you're having a good, safe one. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, with these critiques, the point is to share all of our opinions. So it's really important that you leave comments in the chat bar for poets, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. Those are the two best places to leave comments. Please do leave your comments as we go along. The point of these critiques, as always, is to sort of have that creative writing workshop experience that a lot of us have access to for like a little bit of our lives, but maybe not right now. And it's great to be able to provide that kind of venue where you get feedback on your poems from other people who love poetry, and so you can see what the audience feels and how your poems are bouncing off them. And it's always a really important thing, to have actual strangers looking at your poems. So that's what we're going to be doing here. That's what we do every Friday. And if you'd like to participate, the link is in the show notes, either on YouTube or Facebook, for how to submit. But there's a submission form on Submittable, and then I do a random drawing from that at the end of every month. So there's 3 shows left. The last show in November, we'll do a drawing again for December's guests. But now let's get into these poems. We have 2 poems today, as always. And I should say, too, please do turn your phone sideways if you're on a phone. Click on full screen if you're on desktop so that you can read along as we go and see clearly. Because that always helps if you're critiquing a poem. It's always good to be able to read them. So, hey to Sally D. Let me make sure everything's working, too. Leah Iannone from Brooklyn. Hello. James Tasillo. Hello to you, too. Good to see you. Let's see. We got a bunch of people over there. We're good to go. So let's dive into this poem. We have 2, as always. And they're 2 poems by Pervin Saket. All the homes we leave behind. The first cradle of placenta. Then makeshift swings of saris and swaddles shaped into the sleeping lap of a grandmother. Homes with the whir of bajaj mixes and fans chopping up an air saturated benevolently with yesterday's smells of overripe bananas and ghee. Some homes are ether, the escape of a story, the crescendo of a hymn, a son's embrace before the chill of puberty, the expanse of all mothers indoors. Homes with metal railings draped in wet of towels, homes with dust suspended in sunbeams, like so much hungover glitter. Homes of wood expanding and creaking each summer, or a lover's arms shrinking and silent at the turn of seasons. And then a final leave-taking, not unlike the first, a farewell to bone, navel, lung, nostril, and skin. That is today's first poem, All the Homes We Leave Behind. I like the idea of this poem, first of all. I like, where it goes. The sort of arc of the poem works really well, I think. Let me move this a little closer so I don't have to reach. Okay. So the title, All the Homes We Leave Behind. I like the title. It's interesting, makes me curious what it's going to be about. So I think that's the main job of a title, is to convey some information and make you want to read the poem. And I think that does there. The first cradle of placenta. Then I wonder why it's the first and not first the. Should that be the other way around? First the cradle of placenta. Does that make a little more sense? I think that does. Then makeshift swings of saris and swaddles shaped into the sleeping lap of a grandmother. So I like the S sounds and the music of this. It works out the swings of saris. I like that a lot. And swaddled shapes into the sleeping lap of grandmother. It's a good, very, it's a visually strong line. Draws me into the poem. One thing I want to point out in this poem that I had trouble with, you might have heard as I was reading, we have a comma at the end of the line here. But this is not in the right spot. Okay, that's better, I think. So we have a comma in the line here. And once we have a comma at the end of the line, I'm assuming that there is going to be commas where they should be. And we have a comma here, so there's commas intraline too. But for the most part, there's no punctuation at the end of lines when there should be a comma. And there's no punctuation at the end of stanzas too, even though every time it's a hard break. Like each stanza is sort of a ghazal-like structure almost, where each stanza has a bit of repetition, and then is its own unit, and there's never like enjambment over a stanza, and so I think this way of writing can work, but you have to set us up with the expectation right away that it's going to be like this, so we start tripping up reading. So if you're going to have no punctuation at the end of the lines and stanzas here, I think you definitely should cut that. And then see, and it's kind of perfect. So if you did first the cradle of placenta, then makeshift swings, there should be a comma there. But it's not a place where you trip up if it's not there, because it's a very clear clause, if that makes sense. And so when you see that there's not, without really thinking about it all, as a reader of poetry at least, you train your brain to not have to, to add your own punctuation, I guess you could say. And so if we cut that out, then we get the first cradle of placenta. We kind of pause naturally there, then makeshift swings of sorries. Then we know that there's going to be no punctuation guiding us. So I think that's important to cut that. Otherwise, you saw like, especially down here, the expanse of all a mother's indoors. I expected there to be another word there, that finished, indoors and finished that line. So I tripped at that spot. There were a couple other places there too. I tripped because I expected there to be punctuation, and there wasn't. So. Homes with a whir of Bajaj mixes and fans chopping up an air saturated benevolently. That's a bit of a big word. It's just sort of a mouthful to say benevolently. And I wonder if it doesn't really fit with crescendo is kind of a big word too. But benevolently, how many? One, benevolently, 5 syllables. It's very long. They call them inkhorn words, because you take a lot of ink in the old inkwell. Benevolently, and I just tripped saturated. Maybe it's because saturated is a long word too. So you have saturated benevolently, and those two words together are sort of a mouthful. So maybe you could, change the word there. With yesterday's smells of overripe bananas and geese. So we get the again we get the sense of presence here in place, which I like. So I'm feeling good about this poem. I'm feeling engaged. Some homes are ether, and then we shift here to a something more abstract. Some homes are ether, and that sort of ignites the brain a little bit too. So that's interesting. It further draws me into the poem because it's, the one thing, I think I mentioned this just last week, but when you start to have repetition, I sort of, in the back of my head, I'm worried this isn't going to go on all day and night, is it? Like I'm reminded of playing those. It actually is the. Stop That Ball, that old children's story, and the ball just bounces through town and the kid's running after it, and at the end he says, could this go on all day and night? It could, and it just might. I kind of feel that when we start to get too much repetition, and so when it shifts something, even if the structure's the same, shifting to something ethereal, for lack of a better word, I think works and continues to draw your interest in. The escape of a story, the crescendo of a hymn, a son's embrace. There's another place where, because we cut that comma, I know that I shouldn't expect one. And so mentally I'm prepared for the missing comma there. A son's embrace before the chill of puberty, the expanse of all a mother's indoors. So a son's embrace before the chill of puberty, the expanse of all a mother's indoors. See, so this feels off to me. I almost feel like it's missing a word. So just the syntax feels wrong. Is something missing? I'm wondering. The expanse of all a mother's indoors. Is it that the mother sort of controls the entirety of the indoor home, like it's her domain? I think if so, that could be said better. In a way that isn't sort of confusing and hard to suss out. But let's see. So maybe change that line. Homes with metal railings draped in the wet of towels. Homes with dust suspended in sunbeams. So dust suspended with sunbeams is a little cliche. It's just an image that we see all the time in poems. So find something. Find something more interesting. Like so much hungover glitter And actually, I think we've had a poem on Critique of the Week that mentioned sunbeams and referred to them as glitter. So this whole line, I would change that and make it more interesting. It's just, the fresh language is what sort of lights our brains on fire. And that's what we want in poems. And so images that we've seen before and comparisons we've seen before, unless you're adding to them, there's things to cut. So I would find a better way to, it's just something more interesting to point out. I think the dust is fine, or I don't know. You could go anywhere, but just something different. Homes of wood expanding and creaking each summer, or lovers' arms shrinking and silent at the turn of seasons. It's a little sort of, So this part here feels a little abstract in a way that I'm not engaging with as much. So probably these two, these two lines and these two lines are the two that could sort of be spruced up the most and made more interesting. And then a final leave-taking, not unlike the first, a farewell to bone, navel, lung, nostril, and skin. So I like the ending. I didn't, the way the poem was progressing, I didn't see that coming. And then I liked it, so I like the ending. So that's my critique. There's some small changes with this poem, but otherwise I think it's a poem that works pretty well. Just the punctuation, I'd shift that around. A little word choice stuff going on here. A couple sort of cliched, or a little confusing and a little cliche. So those things could be just, really simple edits to those things. But I think it worked otherwise. Let's see what everybody else says. Pervin's here. Wow, and it's like 3 a.m. where she is. So let's see. Marianne Color asks if it's blurry. I don't think it's blurry for my preview window looks fine. There's a little gear where you're watching, and make sure it's it's settings. You click on that, and then you can change the quality. It's streaming in 1080. No, not even 1080. Even higher than that. Whatever the 19. It's streaming HD, so it should work. Okay, T.R. Paulson, love the title and first line. Agree with Tim about the wording. Okay, that's T.R. Paulson. Always good advice from T.R. agreeing with me. The first is correct. Makeshift swings could be. So Deb Ewing says the first here. So she's saying it ties to the makeshift swings. The first cradle of the placenta. I see. Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. So the first cradle is and then this would be the second cradle. Did everybody pick that up, or was that just me that sort of missed that? I wasn't thinking the first cradle of placenta, then makeshift. Maybe I was just thinking about the punctuation too much to notice. But instead of you could say the second swings of saris, and then maybe it's a little too many S's, but to get that across a little bit more. I didn't visualize that as like the second cradle, but I love the concept of that as the second cradle. T.R. Paulson says, already there's a lot of S alliteration, so definitely don't add the second. Swaddled, shaped into sleeping, swings of saris, swaddled, shaped. Yeah, I think that this last S is maybe one too many for the alliteration. James Cecilio says, no need for benevolently. Anise Cassell says, not just a mouthful, but benevolently is also unnecessary adjective. Yeah, and adjectives are just the weakest type of word. You want to tell stories through images because we're imagistic creatures, and that's where the power comes from. Debbie Ewing says, my only other critique, because I really love everything, the repetition of homes in every stanza, but the first is disappointing. Disappointing is too harsh. What about using other metaphors for home as you did with cradle? So that it was missing from the first stanza. Yeah, well, the first stanza, though, it's tied to the homes in the title, kind of. So I don't know if it's necessary in the first, but I see what you're saying. I think I read that as Bajaj mixes. I missed the I. So mixies. I'm not sure what that even is. What is Bajaj? let's see. We'll look up Mixies. Is that something? No, but Mixer. So it's a company that makes mixers. So I think that's just a typo. I think that's just mixers. Good for pointing that out. I just blew right through it, which goes to show you how people won't even catch all your errors. That's just how it goes. But someone will catch everything. Thanks for pointing that out. There was who was that? Sinead Curo. Okay, let's see. The Expanse. Where's the let's see. James Cecilla says the Expanse sentence. I don't know what that means. The Expanse. Where's the Expanse? Expanse? The wood's expanding. Am I missing it? I don't see it. I wish I had a... Sometimes I wish for a computer so I could look up the word really quick. A little search. I don't see the word expanse. Do you mean expanding? The expanding wood? The only thing about this line... I lived in old houses that creaked a lot, and usually it was the cold that made them creak. But maybe the expansion in summer, like the shrinking, was more creaky in my creaky old houses than the summer. But I don't know. I just sort of let that go in my head and didn't really give it much thought. Let's see. Let's see. I liked Ether, but Mark A. Grenier says, should this just be either? Some homes are either. The escape of a story. I thought it was Ether. So these are, because they're like ephemeral things. So I don't think it should be either. I think that's right. I like that part. Debbie Wing says glitter is important from a Daisy Indian cultural perspective because sequins are everything. So the glitter there is good. Yeah, and I think it was an Indian poet who used the same metaphor in a different poem that we critiqued, where it was the sun, the dust and the sunbeams was like glitter. I don't know. I think that image is just such a used image. It should be something a little more interesting. Let's see. And Nina Parmenter says, I love repetition in poetry, but you have homes as a strong word at the very start of 3 stanzas, and then the some homes are ether. Doesn't quite fit. I would full on commit and start every stanza with the word homes. Yeah, that's 2 people who thought that. So definitely consider that. Let's see. And James Cecilla says the ending drew an emotion out of me. Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it was a very good ending. Let's see. And other people like the ending. Debbie Wing likes the ending. She's spectacular. Mark A. Greener says there seems to be too many words in this. I'm not quite sure why. Yeah, there's some like the or the benevolently and things like that. There are a few words that I would cut. Okay, let's move on to the next poem because it's already been, we're up to the 20-minute mark already. But this was just some tinkering here, but I liked it. Let's check out the other one. This is Ways of Touching, also by Pervin Saket. Ways of Touching. The joke touches the throat as laughter. The aroma touches the tongue as saliva. The lover touches the beloved as attention. Touch me like that night we drove on empty ribbons of road, and you switched off the headlights, and the whoosh of the pines enveloped us as we froze. Touch me like the ancient ocean nuzzles against the shore, still sweeping lustily over each grain of sand 1,000,000 years old, and all in sight of young lovers. Touch me like the idol touches the devotee, as wafts of incense, as the echo of bells. Touch me in these, the truest ways, transcending our barbed borders of skin. That's Ways of Touching. Another good poem. I like this one too. And I think the critique is sort of similar here. Just there's some things to sort of tweak as we go. But the poem, again, I like the the way it progresses as a whole. I think it works really well. The joke touches the throat as laughter. The aroma touches the tongue as saliva. The lover touches the beloved as attention. So we already talked about this with the other poem too. But when it gets to be repetition like this, it just feels sort of like dull. There's a dullness to too much repetition. And there are ways to pull it off. But you sort of have to be really careful with it. I think this works a lot better if you said, if you chopped up the syntax and made it sort of, varied it. So the joke touches the throat as laughter. And I would cut this and just sort of, you don't have to include the comma, but as if there were a comma. Aroma touches the tongue, and I would get rid of saliva. Or maybe even I would get rid of his laughter too. What if it was just the joke touches the throat, aroma touches the tongue? Because the idea of the joke touching the throat, that's a really, really beautiful line. And we know it's laughter. Like, we know what you mean is a joke, and then we can connect in there. We can make that leap with you rather than being told what it is. So we're like really being engaged with the poem if we're allowed to make, draw our own conclusions like that. And the joke touches the throat. It's just, I love that line. That's just a great line. And so what if it's just the joke touches the throat, aroma touches the tongue, the lover touches the beloved as attention, touch me like that. I think that works. And then because the lover touches the beloved, it's sort of not as interesting as the other two. Aroma touching the tongue is really interesting too, I should have mentioned. But those are both great ways. They're synesthetic sort of metaphors, or not metaphors, it's literally true. But it's not the way that you think about it. So it's really an engaging way to put it. The lover touches but then the lover touching the beloved is kind of common. So then saying it as attention, I think maybe include that. Teach me like that night we drove on empty ribbons of road, and you switched off the headlights, and the whoosh of the pines enveloped us as we froze. I think maybe in a similar way to including the laughter, which I would have cut, I think maybe you can cut the whoosh of, and just say, touch me like that night we drove on empty, and I like ribbons of road, as you switched off the headlights, and the pines enveloped us as we froze. Because then you're actually experiencing it rather than sort of being told about the laughter, told about the whooshing. You're creating a movie in our minds. Anytime you're writing a poem, sort of layer by layer and scene by scene. So we're already feeling that. So, so I don't think the whoosh is necessary. And it's also sort of the onomatopoeia of the word. It's a little different than the feel of the rest of the poem, so I'd cut that. Touch me like the ancient ocean nuzzles against the shore, still sweeping lustily over each grain of sand, 1,000,000 years old, and all in sight of young lovers. I would cut this and just leave it that, for similar reasons. Don't go too far. Like, let the strength of these really great images, they tell a lot on their own, so there's no need for it. And also, I just noticed, but you have periods at the end of these stanzas now all of a sudden, even though they weren't here. So you got to pick your punctuation and be consistent so people don't get confused by it. But I love this. And usually an adverb like lustily, sweeping lustily over each grain of sand. Normally I wouldn't like that, but I think it's really necessary there because it tells the story in a different way. If it was just sweeping over each grain of sand, it wouldn't be the same. So that's a rare place where an adverb really works. And the idea of, the waves lustily sweeping over these grains of sand that they can never change in 1,000,000 years. That's really amazing. Although they do change, I guess, but they, I don't know. I mean, it's the same sort of sand in total or something like that. So it's a really cool idea. I like that. Touch me like the idol touches the devotee, as wafts of incense, as the echo of bells. Touch me in these, the truest ways, transcending our barred borders of skin. And I wonder, too, See, I think, is it every line? Yeah, I think every bit of this poem just goes on a little too far past what's powerful. So I'm just like cutting the ends of everything, but I think you could end it here and get rid of that. And then touch me like the idol touches the devotee, as wafts of incense, as the echo of bells. So the echo of bells is great. Touch me in these, the truest ways. And you could just end it like that, instead of sort of going too much explaining, transcending our barred borders of skin. Like, we get sort of the concept, and we can like meet us 80% of the way instead of 100%. Okay, so that's mine. I just have some cuts in this one. This is like a tiny critique for me, because if you agree with any of this stuff, you just do it in 30 seconds. It's no problem. Because this is a really good poem. I like it. Ways of touching. It's similar, like structurally too, to the other one. This is like a sort of a list of ways of touching, and this is all the homes we leave behind. So they're sort of go together in an interesting way too. Pervin mentioned in the note, which I don't have in front of me, that these are part of a book. And so that makes sense. They fit, that they feel very similar. Let me see what everybody else says here. Anise Cassell says, dandy imagery. T.R. Paulson agrees again, end with truest ways. Yeah. Debbie Ewing says, I love the last two lines, though. Transcending barred borders hints at forbidden emotions. Yeah, but we already know that there's forbidden emotions as a thing. Because if the touch was happening, right, you wouldn't have to write the poem. I think it's all in there, and this just goes too far. This is one of those ones where I think they're good lines on their own. For another poem, though. Like, just use that in something else. Would be my advice. Yeah, Nina Parmenter says, save it for another poem, perhaps. Yeah, exactly. Let me scroll up and see what people are saying here. Let's see. And Sharon Coates says, removing as laughter really exposes the greatness of the first line. Yeah, exactly. T.R. Paulson says, for me, the touching poem begins with touch me. The first three couplets sound like the poem's trying to find its way into itself. Other than that, cut a few adverbs, and the poem's pretty much done. Also, the road as a ribbon is a bit cliche. Yeah, I was wondering about that. I always wonder, because I read so many poems, and if I crossed out everything I've seen before, then I would be like crossing out almost a lot. I mean, it's amazing that we come up with anything original at all. And so I've never seen the joke touches the throat. I mean, that's amazing. Ribbons of road I've seen sometimes, but I don't think I've seen that much. So I don't know. It's like bordering on getting close to being a common way of putting it, in my view, which is why I didn't point it out. But if TR says it's a bit cliche, then maybe it is by now. It's always hard for me to make that call. And then even the lines, like a great line like that, like the joke touches the throat. When I hear a line that's so good like that, I always think, God, that can't be original. It's too good. and then I look it up in databases and things and find out that it really is. So, if Google hasn't seen it, then you're probably really original. I think that's a great line. Let me see. Mary Ellen Carr says, I like the poem, but I don't like the title. Ways of touching. I don't have a problem with the title. It's not the most interesting, but I thought it worked. Let's see. Let's see. Now that's the point where I'm trying to. It's hard to see if 2, 3. Yeah, so it's hard to see which comments sometimes as I'm scrolling up are from the last poem or from this poem. But yeah. So Mark Grenier says, should this poem begin at stanza 4? I don't know. I mean, I think it kind of moves in. I think these are necessary. Maybe they could be expanded. But I liked it. It sets up that repetition. and then it sort of expands outward from these like little points. It's kind of like a flower blooming out or something. I think it works like structurally. So I understand why people are saying that it feels different. There's a very different structure. And even, we noticed all of a sudden there's periods in these newer, longer stanzas. And here there's not. So even maybe subconsciously, the poet knows that there's a difference. But I would my advice is to draw this into one stanza, like I said, and sort of get rid of the structural repetition. And then I think it would fit more with the rest of the poem and not be an issue like that. Let's see. I think that might be... Let me look over at YouTube too. Sorry I haven't jumped over here in a little while. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm reading everybody's comments. Caitlin Bucksbaum over on YouTube says that barbed doesn't sure if she doesn't think barbed is the right word. Barbed borders of skin. Yeah, I mean, that's I did wonder about that, but it's interesting, I mean, if you look very close, skin's pretty rough, in a microscope, and maybe you could imagine it that way. And Silly Dunn over here says, Caitlin, I know what you mean, but somehow it works for me. Yeah, and that's kind of the feeling I have too. That it it's a little strange way to put it, but I think it worked for me. So I didn't point that out as something to change. And Silly Dunn says, ways of touching, I was moved by it. Yeah, I thought it was a good poem. Like there's a real, especially with this poem, there's a real sort of propelling energy forward. Like there's this, as we drove the empty ribbons of robe, right, and you switch off the headlights, the poem kind of zooms ahead at that point too in an interesting way, which is another reason why I like the effect of this intro, even though it's different than the rest. Like the poem feels like it's sort of taking off, and then you get into this emotion, which peaks at this wasp of incense, the echo of bells, touch me in these. I love that touch me in these, actually. I didn't point that out, but I should have. That's a great, really simple but great line. Touch me in these. And just the quickness of that. And so there's this acceleration through the poem that I thought worked really well too. I would just end it here though and save that for some other poem. Okay, I think that is all for today. Let's see. So Evan Elties says, I feel like the barred borders recalls no man's land on a battlefield. Yeah, that's what I was imagining, actually. Thanks for pointing that out. But yeah, I was imagining like there's a no man's land between us, which I think worked, but I just like the other ending better. Let's see. Oh, Jenny Middleton says, the road is a ribbon of moonlight, is a line from The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes. Yeah. Let's see. Caitlin Bishop asks, in what databases do you look for cliches? There's a database for plagiarism, and for what's it called? I can't remember. I haven't used it in a while because Google works kind of just as well. You have to subscribe, and I don't use it anymore. But that's what we used for a long time. There's a couple different services that universities mostly can use to see if there's plagiarism in paper, and you can use that to see if not just plagiarism, but how fresh lines are in poems too. Let's see. Okay, well, I think that is it for today. Thanks again, everybody, for joining me. This has been a lot of fun, as it always is. We'll be back, like we always are, with the open mic show on Sunday. That is Sunday noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time, and that is an open mic for all of your poems about current events. So anything that relates to the news, anything that's going on in the world today, we can share that on a nice, fun open mic for Poets Respond on Sunday. And of course, submit your poem to Poets Respond through Submittable by midnight tonight to have it considered for the one poem that we publish on Sunday. But then anything else that relates to news in any way, even if it's an older poem or whatever, you can share at Poets Respond Live, and it's a lot of fun. Then next week's guest on the Rattlecast coming up is Brian Sonia Wallace. He is the author of this new book of essays, The Poetry of Strangers, What I Learned Traveling America with a Typewriter. I think that's what that says. It's a small window for me. But he is Rent Poet at rentpoet.com, and he has been writing poetry like in parks and at parties and things for strangers. Like you'll talk to him, he'll kind of interview you, I think how it works, and then about what you want the poem to be about, and then he will write a poem for you at the party or at the park or while you wait in line at whatever. And he toured the country doing that for a long time, and he has this book. In addition to a whole bunch of poems he wrote for strangers, which we can share on the show, there's this whole book of essays, The Poetry of Strangers, which is really interesting. He was also just named the Poet Laureate of West Hollywood. And that's Brian Sonia Wallace, Rattlecast number 67, Tuesday, November 17th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And the prompt for this week's show, what was the prompt? Someone probably already said it in the comments, but the prompt was... I'll write a poem that focuses on opposites or contradictions, like a noisy library, sunny night, a tragic comedy, etc. Write your whole poem about one or sprinkle many throughout. So write a contradictions poem. And that is the prompt, and we'll have an open mic at the end of Rattlecast number 67 for your contradiction poems. So hope to see you then. Hope to see you Sunday for the Poet Respond Live, and hope you have a great rest of your Friday the 13th. Have a good one. Bye.